The millionaire saw her digging through the trash. His cleaning lady, that invisible woman who had been working in silence for years, was looking for food scraps among the waste. Everyone expected him to fire her with contempt, but what that man did left everyone speechless. Because sometimes, behind a worn-out uniform and tired hands, a story is hidden that no one bothered to ask about. And when the truth came to light, everything changed forever. Like this, if it touched your heart. It is more than a click. It is recognizing that dignity lives in places we do not always look. Comment how you think this story is going to end, and if you have not subscribed yet, it costs you nothing, but for us, it means the whole world. Thank you for being here. The United Nations Conference Hall in New York sparkled under old gold lamps, reflecting light on polished marble walls and dark wood panels that smelled of history and power. Delegations from 40 countries occupied the rows in perfect diplomatic order. Journalists adjusted cameras with lenses that cost fortunes. Advisors ran from one place to another with leather folders, and the rehearsed murmur of diplomacy floated in the air like electricity before a storm that everyone expects, but no one wants to name. In the last simultaneous translation booth, the most distant and forgotten of the main hall, almost hidden behind a structural column, Camila Andrade adjusted with meticulous care the headphones worn out by years of use by others. She was 33 years old, but her hands told another story. They were hands hardened by industrial detergents, with small scars from minor cuts, short and practical nails without any polish. She tested the technical channels one by one, took a deep breath trying to calm the nerves that danced in her stomach, and checked the microphone like someone preparing for something infinitely greater than her own body. Brazilian by birth and heart, daughter of humble farmers from the interior of Minas Gerais, Camila had crossed the Atlantic years ago with a patched cloth suitcase and a dream that everyone in her town considered impossible, almost ridiculous. She had worked as a cleaning lady in 3 different American universities, cleaning empty classrooms during the silent early mornings, mopping hallways where during the day professors with doctorates and privileged students walked who never looked her in the eyes. But while she cleaned, while everyone slept in their comfortable houses, Camila studied. She hid in libraries during her 15-minute breaks, wrote down complicated phonetics on paper napkins that she kept in her pockets, repeated expressions in a voice so low that not even the walls heard her, building language by language with an iron discipline that would have impressed any academic, if any had paid attention. No one in that important hall knew that the woman who collected the trash from their offices every night, who emptied wastebaskets full of drafts of failed speeches and half-finished coffee cups, was the same person who woke up early, submerged up to her neck in advanced linguistics manuals, training accents in front of foggy mirrors of public bathrooms, memorizing complex grammatical structures in 6 different languages, collecting voices like others, collect coins or stamps. Her hands rested now on sophisticated technical controls that she never imagined touching. She wore a simple white blouse bought at a second-hand store, without jewelry because she never had money for those frivolities, without elaborate makeup because she did not know how to apply it, nor was she interested in learning, only her dark brown hair tied in a practical ponytail that kept the hair away from her focused face. Through the tinted glass of the booth, she could observe the main stage as if watching a movie. Microphones strategically prepared, flags of nations lined up in alphabetical order, serious faces of diplomats waiting for the start of the most important summit of the year on climate refugees. It was the event that would define policies for millions of displaced people, and she was there, invisible as always, ready to serve from the shadows without expecting even a gram of recognition. The door of the hall opened, with a weight that made heads turn. Dr. Alvin Klein entered, and his entry was like the arrival of a king to his court. A German living in the United States for 20 years, a senior international relations consultant, feared in diplomatic circles for humiliating subordinates, with the calculated coldness of someone who never in his life needed to be kind to get what he wanted. He wore an Italian suit that cost more than 3 months of Camilla's salary, silver cufflinks on his wrists, English shoes polished like mirrors. He walked with sure steps to the technical area, saw Camilla adjusting equipment with absolute concentration, and pointed with his index finger as if he were ordering a dog. "You," "The cleaning girl," he said in impeccable English with a Germanic accent, loud enough for several people around to turn and look. "Bring me mineral water. Cold. Fast. I am thirsty." Camilla raised her eyes slowly. She felt the heat rising up her neck, how her cheeks burned with that terrible mix of shame and contained rage that she knew all too well. "Sir," she replied in English too, with a Brazilian accent she did not try to hide, with a firm voice but without raising it a single decibel. "I am the interpreter assigned to this session, not service staff." Klein let out a short, sharp laugh, cruel like a small knife stabbing slowly. "Interpreter? You? With that slum accent?" His smile was a wound. "Where did you study? In YouTube tutorials? Or maybe in some free university for people without resources?" Some diplomats around laughed discreetly, hiding their mouths behind folders or pretending with fake coughs. Others turned their gaze away uncomfortable, but without intervening, because contradicting Dr. Klein was something no one did twice. A young assistant in the second row lowered her eyes, ashamed by the scene, but said nothing, because the complicit silence is also a form of violence. Camilla pressed her lips together. She lowered her eyes for a second, not out of weakness, but to contain words that would not help anyone. She swallowed the humiliation like someone swallowing ground glass with conscious effort, and returned to her work without deigning to respond. It was not the first time they tried to reduce her to what they imagined she was based solely on her appearance, in her modest clothes, in her hands that smelled of honest work. But something inside her, something old and deeply rooted, reminded her why she had arrived there. Not for empty recognition, not for fleeting applause that is forgotten in an hour, but because voices matter, all voices, even and especially the ones that the world insists on not hearing. Klein walked away laughing softly, murmuring something in German to a colleague walking next to him. Camilla saw them go and took 3 deep breaths, a technique she had learned from a free psychologist at a community center. She closed her eyes. She visualized her mother in Brazil, with her hands deep in red earth growing rice under the merciless sun. She visualized her father building fences with old but strong wood. And she found strength where she had always found it, in the certainty that honest work has inherent dignity that no insult can steal. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, as marked by the giant digital clock over the main stage, the most critical session of the entire summit was to begin. The Syrian ambassador, the main guest of that afternoon, would speak in classical and dialectal Arabic about displaced persons camps, humanitarian emergency treaties, and the invisible crisis of millions of people fleeing not from wars, but from droughts, floods, uninhabitable temperatures. His speech had been announced in all international media. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, everyone had cameras positioned strategically. The cameras were already on with their little red lights blinking. The international press waited for every word with recorders and notebooks open, and the translation coordinator, an American man of 52 years named Robert Mendoza, walked from one side of the technical area to the other with his face turning paler, sweating despite the strong air conditioning. The main Arabic interpreter, a Lebanese man with 20 years of experience named Samir, had not arrived. Family emergency. A traffic accident. His wife had called from the hospital making efforts not to cry. Impossible for him to arrive. A catastrophic void, right at the exact hour when the whole world needed to hear those words translated with surgical precision. "We need to postpone the session," Robert whispered to the general director, almost without air in his lungs. "There is no other possible option. Without an Arabic interpreter, this is—" Klein turned like a judge pronouncing a sentence. "Postpone in front of the international press, in front of 40 delegations that have traveled specifically for this." His voice was ice. "It would be an absolute diplomatic disaster. It would become a headline in all the newspapers. It would end the reputation of this event and probably your career, Mendoza." The digital clock marked 1:57, 3 minutes. The Syrian ambassador was already in the side hallway, checking his notes, adjusting his dark blue tie, preparing himself mentally for the most important speech he would give in his life. Delegates began to get restless in their upholstered seats, looking at their Swiss watches. exchanging looks of growing confusion. Journalists checked their phones with professional impatience, some already sending messages to their editors warning of possible technical problems. The murmur in the hall grew like a tide rising slowly but inevitably, waves of worried conversations crashing against each other. Camilla observed everything from her elevated booth. She knew that Arabic. She knew it intimately. She had spent 3 full years working part-time as a cleaning lady in shelters for Syrian refugees in Brooklyn, in the neighborhood where the community was concentrated. She cleaned bathrooms and hallways during the day to pay the rent for a room shared with 4 other women. But she stayed voluntarily at night to talk, to learn, to understand not only the words, but the deep soul that beat behind them. She had studied dialects with Ahmed, a literature professor from Damascus who now served coffee in a tourist cafe. She had memorized structures of classical Quranic Arabic with Fatima, a grandmother who had lost 3 sons in bombings and who found comfort teaching her sacred language to anyone who showed genuine respect. She had cried with mothers who told her about children drowned in the Mediterranean, listened to stories that no academic textbook would ever contain, absorbed not only grammar but pain, hope, resistance, dignity under unbearable pressure. Her heart began to beat stronger, faster. It was not exactly fear. It was something more complex, a mix of absolute certainty and paralyzing terror. She knew she could do it, but she also knew what it would mean to expose herself, to become visible, to risk public failure. The clock marked 1:58. Camilla stood up slowly from her chair, not to seek empty spotlight, not for personal vanity, but because there was literally no other possible choice. Someone had to speak for those who had no voice in that hall of expensive marbles. "I can take over the translation," she said, her voice coming out firmer than she expected. The technical room seemed to shrink. 5 people turned to look at her simultaneously. Robert blinked as if he did not understand the language. Klein looked at her with an expression between absolute disbelief and renewed contempt. "You?" The word came out of his mouth like an elegant spit. Camilla breathed once, deep, feeling the air fill her lungs completely. She felt her heart hammer like a war drum in her chest, but her voice remained firm, clear, without any trembling. "I speak fluent Arabic, Dr. Klein, Syrian dialect specifically, which is what the ambassador will use. I studied for 3 years with refugees and native teachers in Brooklyn. Classical Arabic too, including the formal diplomatic register necessary for this context." Klein raised his hand, interrupting with a sharp gesture, almost violent. "Enough of this cheap theatre. I am not going to risk the reputation of this international summit with an amateur without credentials, a cleaning lady playing at being a professional interpreter." 1:59. But at that exact instant, Ambassador Ahmed al-Rashid was already walking up the 3 steps to the main pulpit. His thin figure was silhouetted against the multinational flags. He adjusted the microphone to his height. The light of the spotlights fell on him like an interrogation. The cameras focused. The world watched. The session would not wait. The cameras would not turn off. The moment would not stop. The coordinator Robert looked at Klein with pleading eyes. Klein returned the gaze, caught between his monumental arrogance and the total absence of viable alternatives. The silence in the hall became dense, heavy, unbearable. 5 minutes, Klein finally gave in, spitting the words as if they were poison. 5 minutes of trial. A single significant error, a single imprecision that any expert notices, and I take you out of that booth immediately. Understood? Camilla nodded once, without words, because they were not needed. She walked to the main Arabic booth with steps that seemed surer than she felt inside, with her spine straight, because her mother had always told her that posture is the first form of dignity. Camilla entered the booth like someone entering an arena where she could die or be reborn. There were no possible middle terms. She closed the thick glass door behind her, and the outside world became a little quieter, a little further away. She adjusted the professional headset over her ears, feeling the familiar weight of the large headphones. She rested her fingers on the microphone button and felt a slight tremor run through her hands like low-voltage electricity. But when she closed her eyes for 2 seconds and took a deep breath, the tremor disappeared. Her voice would not tremble. That she knew, with absolute certainty. She had cleaned too many floors, survived too many humiliations, studied too many nights in solitude to fail now that she finally had a real opportunity. Through the tinted glass, she saw Ambassador Ahmed al-Rashid perfectly. He was a man of about 60 years, with deep wrinkles that told stories of difficult decades, eyes that had seen too much suffering, hands that trembled slightly for reasons that were not physical, but emotional. He wore a simple dark suit, without flashy decorations, without symbols of power. He was a man who represented millions of invisible people, and that responsibility weighed visibly on his slumped shoulders. The ambassador began to speak, and his deep voice filled the hall, amplified by expensive microphones. He spoke in formal, classical Arabic, but strategically sprinkled with Syrian dialect expressions that gave it emotional authenticity. His speech flowed with the specific cadence of someone who has repeated the same pleas for years without really being heard, with the contained emotion of someone who knows that this could be the last chance to make a difference. He spoke of children brutally separated from their families by droughts that turned fertile fields into cracked deserts, of old people who died on escape routes, their bodies abandoned on dirt roads because no one had the strength to carry them, of seas that had become liquid cemeteries, swallowing hopes and future with every wave. Camilla closed her eyes for half a second more, allowed the words to enter completely into her, felt the weight and the pain, and then began to translate. And it was not mechanical, it was not robotic, it was not the cold and technically correct but emotionally empty translation that many professional interpreters offer. It was something completely different. It was deeply human. Every sentence that came out of her lips in English maintained the exact weight of the original Arabic, but she made it accessible, clear, understandable, without sacrificing a single atom of the contained emotion. She knew that intimate sound, that specific cadence, that particular pain, not because she had read it in academic manuals of applied linguistics, but because she had heard it directly from living people in cold New York winter nights, in improvised shelters that smelled of damp and hopelessness, in conversations that no camera filmed and no journalist considered important enough. Outside the booth in the technical area, Klein monitored the audio channel with professional headphones, with his arms crossed over his chest, with an expression that shifted between the secret hope of failure and something more disturbing, the involuntary recognition that something extraordinary was happening. He started by frowning aggressively, waiting for the inevitable trip, actively looking for the error that would allow him to shout, "See, I told you!" But the error did not come. The words flowed. The translation was not only grammatically correct, it was perfect in every sense. It was technically flawless and emotionally devastating. In the main hall, the delegates who understood Arabic began to exchange meaningful looks. Something rare was happening, something they could not name but that they felt in their stomachs. Simultaneous translation is usually functional, useful, necessary, but forgettable. This one was not. This was different. This had its own soul. The ambassador of Jordan, a woman of 50 years who had grown up listening to Syrian Arabic in Palestinian refugee camps, slowly took off her translation headphones. She preferred to listen to the original directly, but then she put them back on, fascinated, because she wanted to hear how that unknown woman was translating nuances that even interpreters with doctorates usually missed. The ambassador continued his speech, going into the more technical part: specific resettlement policies, international legal frameworks, numbers of displaced persons by region, concrete funding proposals. Camilla followed every word with a fluidity that seemed supernatural. There was no hesitation. There was no desperate search for technical terms. There was no that uncomfortable pause that reveals someone insecure. Everything flowed like river water that knows its path by heart. And then came the moment that would change everything irrevocably. The ambassador quoted an ancient poetic verse, a classical Arabic proverb about sacred hospitality and shared humanity, loaded with deep religious and cultural symbolism. It was complex, full of references to Quranic texts and Bedouin traditions, something that 90% of professional interpreters would simplify brutally or translate literally, losing all impact and meaning. Camilla recognized the verse instantly. She had heard it from the lips of Fatima, the Syrian grandmother who cried for her dead children while teaching Arabic in that damp refugee center in Brooklyn. She had memorized it not from a book, but from a life. And she delivered an equivalent translation in English that maintained the original poetic image, the rhythmic pace, the emotional impact, not as an unnecessary ornament, but as deep respect for the speaker's intention. She did not simplify. She did not patronize. She trusted that her audience could handle complexity if presented with clarity. There was a heavy silence in the hall, one of those silences that are not empty but dense, loaded with meaning. A French delegate in the fifth row raised his head sharply, as if he had received an unexpected electric shock. A Spanish diplomat in the third row brought her hand to her mouth, containing a reaction that was not professional, but was inevitable. A veteran Reuters journalist, a man who had covered conflicts on 4 continents and thought he had seen everything, lowered his expensive camera for a second without even realizing it, forgetting for an instant his job. Something had changed in the molecular atmosphere of the hall. It was not dramatic, it was not noisy, but it was absolutely undeniable to anyone paying attention. Ambassador Ahmed al-Rashid continued his speech, now going into the most personal and devastating part, individual stories. He spoke of Layla, a 7-year-old girl who had lost her entire family in a bombing that technically was not war, but an anti-terrorist operation. He described how Layla lived now in a refugee camp in Greece, how she drew endless houses in the wet sand every morning, houses with perfect windows and doors, as if she could rebuild her home with only her small hands. His voice broke slightly, barely perceptible, when he mentioned that Layla no longer spoke, that she had chosen silence as the only way to survive a pain that no child should ever know, that her eyes looked but did not really see, as if she were physically present but absent in every more important sense. Camilla translated with tears held back in her throat that threatened to choke her, but with a perfectly firm voice, perfectly clear. Every word came out clean, precise, carefully articulated. She did not add artificial drama because it was not needed. The naked truth was already powerful enough. Reality did not need exaggerations. Robert Mendoza, the technical coordinator who had doubted her 30 minutes before, now had tears running openly down his cheeks without even trying to hide them. He wiped them away distractedly with the back of his hand while monitoring the audio levels, while checking that all channels worked perfectly, while making sure that extraordinary voice reached every corner of the building. Klein, still with his headphones on, no longer frowned. His face had gone through several transformations in the last 20 minutes, from mocking contempt to uncomfortable surprise to something that looked dangerously like shame. Now he simply listened, motionless like a statue of salt, processing something that his brain, trained in prejudices, did not know how to categorize. When the ambassador pronounced the last sentence of his speech, an urgent and desperate call for collective action from the international community, the silence in the hall was absolute and sacred. No one coughed, no one moved, no one dared to break that moment suspended in time. The world seemed to stop completely for 3 eternal seconds that felt like 3 hours, and then a solitary clap broke the silence like a stone breaking the surface of a still lake. It came from a delegate from Senegal in the third row, an older man with completely white hair and eyes that had seen their own share of pain. Then another clap joined, from a Norwegian woman in climate diplomacy, and another one from a young representative from Bangladesh. And in a matter of seconds that seemed to move in slow motion, the whole hall stood up in a long, sustained, honest ovation. It was not the political and measured applause that is normally heard in these events, that polite applause that lasts exactly 15 seconds because protocol demands it. It was something completely different. It was an applause that was born from the center of the chest, that gushed from a deep recognition of having witnessed something rare and valuable. It was as if the world had collectively remembered what it means to truly listen to someone, not just process information, but receive complete humanity. The Syrian ambassador, visibly surprised by the emotional intensity of the response, turned his body toward where he sensed the translation booth was, although he could not see it clearly through the tinted glass and stage lights. He raised his right hand and placed it over his heart, in a universal gesture of deep gratitude and respect. He knew that something exceptional had just occurred. He had given that speech in similar versions dozens of times in different countries, always with certified professional interpreters, always with technically correct translation. But never, not once in his entire diplomatic career, had he felt that his message reached so completely intact, so faithfully transmitted not only in words, but in essence. Camilla turned off the microphone with hands that now did tremble, but from emotional exhaustion, more than nerves. She leaned back in the booth chair and for the first time in 35 minutes allowed her body to relax completely. She closed her eyes. She breathed. She felt the weight of what had just happened settling on her shoulders like softly accumulating snow. She had not looked for that moment. She had not planned that day. She had not imagined she would have to prove her worth in front of the world. But she had honored it with all she was, with all she had learned in years of silence and solitary study. The applause continued for almost 2 full minutes, something absolutely unusual in diplomatic contexts, where efficiency and time are sacred gods. Journalists recorded not only the ambassador, but also the audience, capturing genuine reactions that are rarely seen in these normally rigid and controlled spaces. When finally the applause began to fade, Robert Mendoza entered the booth without even knocking, with his face still wet with tears that he was not ashamed to show. "Camilla," he said in a hoarse voice, "that was... I have no words. In 30 years working in this field, I had never witnessed anything like it." She looked at him with tired but serene eyes. "I just did my job, Robert." "No," he replied firmly. "You did much more than that. You built a bridge, and in this world of walls that is revolutionary." Klein approached the booth with steps that no longer had the arrogance of the morning. He looked smaller somehow, as if something inside him had shrunk during those 40 minutes. When Camilla came out of the booth, adjusting her hair that had become messy with the headphones, he was waiting for her in the narrow hallway, with his arms at his sides instead of crossed over his chest. His face showed a complex expression that Camilla never expected to see. Genuine shame, mixed with something that could be respect, or at least the forced recognition of having been completely wrong. "How?" Klein murmured, unable to complete the question, unable to hold the gaze directly. Camilla observed him without aggression, but also without submission. She looked at him with the quiet firmness of someone who learned not to ask permission to exist, of someone who knows that dignity is not something others grant, but something one cultivates internally, and that no one can really steal. "Competence, Dr. Klein," she replied with a voice soft but clear as spring water. "Real competence is not measured by the position we hold in corporate charts, nor by the last names we carry, nor by the universities whose names appear on our framed diplomas. It is measured by what we carry inside: acquired knowledge, practiced discipline, cultivated empathy." Klein opened his mouth to respond, but the words got stuck somewhere between the brain and the tongue. He tried again and failed again. Finally, with a visible effort that cost him much more than anyone outside could imagine, he extended his right hand in a gesture that was more than a formal greeting. It was a physical apology. "Forgive me," he said, and his voice sounded different, smaller, more human. "I was completely wrong. About you. About what I assumed based solely on your appearance. About many things." Camilla looked at the extended hand for a long second. She could have ignored it. She would have had every moral right to simply walk by to make him feel a fraction of the contempt he had projected on her that morning. But she had learned something fundamental from her farmer parents, who never stepped in a university. That true dignity is not built by lowering others as revenge, but by rising oneself without needing to step on others' heads. She shook Klein's hand firmly, looking him directly in the eyes. "We all make mistakes, Dr. Klein. The important thing is not to not make them, because that is impossible. The important thing is what we do after, how we grow, how we change." Klein nodded several times, without additional words because everything important had already been said. He walked away with steps less sure than before, with a less upright posture, as if something heavy but necessary had been placed on his shoulders. Camilla watched him go and felt something strange, not triumph or sweet satisfaction for having put him in his place. She felt rather a slight sadness for how many valuable people the world loses simply because they are born in the wrong zip codes, because their hands have calluses instead of manicures, because their accent betrays humble origins. Robert Mendoza then approached with a thick folder under his arm and an expression that mixed urgency with emotion. "Camilla, I need you to come with me right now. There are very important people who want to meet you. The Director of Linguistic Services, the Deputy Secretary General, representatives from... Well, it is better if you come and see it yourself." "Now?" Camilla asked, surprised. "But I was only here as emergency backup. My official shift already ended. I was planning to go back home to..." "Please," Robert interrupted with a voice that was almost a plea. "Trust me. This is important. It could change your life." Camilla followed him through hallways that she normally cleaned at night, but that she now walked through by day, as a person instead of an invisible shadow. They passed by offices with gold plaques, through meeting rooms with mahogany tables, through spaces she had always seen from the perspective of someone pushing a cleaning cart, but that she now saw from a completely different perspective. They arrived at a conference room on the 3rd floor. Robert knocked with his knuckles before opening. Inside, 5 people waited, sitting around an oval table. Elena Cortez, Director of Linguistic Services of the UN, a woman of 45 years with an imposing presence and intelligent gaze. Fernando Ruiz, Deputy Secretary General of the Summit, an older man with an impeccable suit. And 3 more people Camilla did not recognize, but who clearly had positions of power considering how the others addressed them. "Ms. Andrade," Elena said, standing up to shake her hand with genuine warmth. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Please sit down. Can I offer you water, coffee, tea?" "Water is fine, thank you," Camilla replied, sitting in a chair that probably cost more than a month of her rent. Elena personally poured her a glass of water from a crystal jar and sat across from her with a thin folder in her hands. "Ms. Andrade, what we witnessed today was absolutely exceptional. But before we continue this conversation, I need to ask you some direct questions. Do you agree?" Camilla nodded, feeling her heart race again. "What is your official academic background?" Camilla took a deep breath, preparing for the inevitable disappointment she would see in those faces when she told the truth. "I do not have a formal university degree. I studied on my own for years. Public libraries, free online courses, conversational exchanges with refugees and migrants, tutorials, constant practice. All my education has been unconventional." Elena took a note without changing her expression, which was hard to interpret. "How many languages do you speak with functional fluency? Native Portuguese, fluent Spanish, advanced English, conversational and technical classical Arabic and Syrian dialect, upper intermediate French, basic but understandable Italian. And how did you get this assignment today?" "I am part of the temporary staff of a translation agency that you subcontract for events. They called me early this morning as emergency backup in case any of the main interpreters had problems. They did not expect me to actually work, only to be available by protocol." Elena exchanged a meaningful look with Fernando Ruiz, who had remained silent until that moment, observing Camilla with almost clinical attention. "Ms. Andrade," Fernando said in a deep voice that filled the space, "what I am going to tell you is confidential until we make the official announcement in the coming weeks. Do you understand the importance of discretion?" "Yes, sir." The UN, together with several partner organizations, is launching a pilot program called Voices Without Borders. The goal is to identify, train and employ translators and interpreters from marginalized communities, people with exceptional talent who have been systematically ignored by traditional hiring systems. He made a deliberate pause. "After what we witnessed today, we firmly believe that you would be the ideal candidate not only to participate in the program, but to help design and coordinate it from within." Camilla blinked several times, processing words that did not seem real. "Coordinate it? But I barely..." Elena leaned forward with a serious but kind expression. "We want to offer you 2 things simultaneously, Camilla. First, a permanent position as an official UN interpreter, with a fixed assignment here in New York, an indefinite contract, salary according to international scale, all full labor benefits. Second, a leadership role in Voices Without Borders, helping us design fair selection criteria, identify potential candidates, create effective training programs, mentor others who are exactly where you were years ago. Camilla felt the floor move under her feet. I don't know what to say, it's just, do you really think I can do that? Fernando smiled for the first time. Ms. Andrade, what you did today cannot be faked. It cannot be bought with money. It cannot be learned only in university classrooms. Either you carry it inside or you don't. And you clearly carry it in every cell of your body, Robert added from his position by the door. Besides, we need people who understand viscerally what it means to be invisible, to be underestimated, to be dismissed by systems that value credentials over real capacity. You can design selection processes that do not make the same exclusionary mistakes that almost prevented your own talent from being discovered. Camilla looked at the document Elena was now sliding toward her across the polished table. It was several pages with the official United Nations letterhead, with her name written on the top line, with numbers that represented a salary that tripled everything she had earned in her life combined. "And what if I am not enough?" she asked with a small voice. "And what if people constantly question my lack of formal diplomas, my origin, my—" "After today," Elena interrupted firmly, "no one who was in that hall will question your capacity ever again. And anyone who was not present, well, we have recordings. What you did was documented in video, audio, and in the memory of 40 national delegations." Camilla took the pen Elena offered her. Her fingers trembled slightly. She thought of her mother harvesting rice under the rain. She thought of her father building fences with cracked hands. She thought of the nights cleaning offices while others slept peacefully. She thought of all the no's she had received, of all the doors closed in her face, of all the times someone had looked at her as if she were less. And then she thought of something more important, of all the other people like her who existed right now, cleaning buildings in the early morning while listening to educational podcasts, studying on buses on the way to work, memorizing vocabularies in restaurant bathrooms during 5-minute breaks. "I have one condition," she finally said. Eleanor raised an eyebrow with interest. "Which one?" "The program cannot be exclusively for interpreters and translators. It has to open to all kinds of invisible staff, cleaning, security, maintenance, kitchen, logistics, because I know, with absolute certainty, that I am not the only one with hidden talent. There are brilliant people serving coffee, people with valuable knowledge emptying wastebaskets, people with extraordinary capacities that no one bothers to discover because they wear the wrong uniforms." The five looked at each other. Robert smiled broadly. Eleanor nodded with visible approval. Fernando extended his hand. "It's a deal, Ms. Andrade. Welcome officially to the United Nations." Camilla signed the document, feeling that something old and heavy finally fell off her back. The news spread through the building with surprising speed. By the afternoon of the next day, all the permanent staff knew about the interpreter who had been a cleaning lady and about the new program that was being created. The reactions were mixed and revealing. In the second-floor cafeteria during lunch, Camilla unintentionally overheard a conversation between two administrative employees. "It's inspiring, I guess," one was saying, "but also worrying. Are they going to start hiring people without degrees now? What's the point of us having invested years and money in formal education?" "I think the point is that she does have an education," the other replied, "just that she acquired it differently. And in the end, she proved to be better than many with expensive diplomas." The first woman snorted skeptically before changing the subject. Camilla was not offended. She understood the reaction. Change always scares, especially those who benefit from the current system. But she also knew that resistance is part of the process and that results would eventually speak louder than initial doubts. Eleanor had assigned her a small but private office on the 4th floor, with a window overlooking an internal courtyard and a temporary plaque on the door that said, "C. Andrade, Linguistic Inclusion Coordinator." It still felt strange to see her name like that, with an official title, in a space that was legitimately hers. During the following weeks, she worked intensely with a small team designing the selection criteria for Voices Without Borders. They wanted to be rigorous but fair, demanding but accessible. They created a 3-stage process. First, written language proficiency tests that could be taken online for free. Second, live interpretation of complex recorded speeches evaluated by a diverse panel. Third, deep personal interviews to assess motivation, resilience, and capacity for continuous learning. They were not looking for immediate perfection. They were looking for demonstrable potential and a real hunger for growth. Mariana Vega, a veteran French interpreter of 60 years, volunteered to help in the design of the program. She arrived at Camilla's office one afternoon with 2 coffees and a warm smile. "Can I sit down?" "Of course." Mariana took a seat with a sigh that spoke of decades of work. "I've been in this field for 32 years, Camilla. I've worked with the best interpreters in the world, people with doctorates from Oxford and the Sorbonne, and what I saw you do that day was something completely different." "I just did my job," Camilla replied automatically. "No, you built an emotional bridge. You made the ambassador not only be heard, but be felt." Mariana drank her coffee. "You know, I was also invisible once, a long time ago. I was a secretary at a law firm in Paris. I learned languages in the nights after working 12 hours. When I finally got my first chance as an interpreter, no one believed I could do it because I was just a secretary. They looked at me exactly as they looked at you. And how did you overcome that? By doing exactly what you did, proving that competence has nothing to do with origin, but with the work and the heart you put into it." Mariana smiled sadly. "But the world forgets these lessons quickly, Camilla. That is why this program is so important. That is why you need to make sure it's not just a viral moment that is forgotten in 3 months, but the real beginning of a structural change." She was right. Camilla knew it. She could not allow this to be just a cute story people shared on social media with heart emojis before going back to ignoring the invisible people in their own lives. 6 weeks after the incident, Voices Without Borders launched its first official call with press releases in 5 languages. The response was overwhelming and revealing. In just 2 weeks, more than 300 applications arrived from all over the United States. Domestic workers who spoke Tagalog and Spanish, night security guards who mastered 4 languages, restaurant cooks with linguistic knowledge acquired working in multicultural kitchens, cleaning staff who listened to academic audiobooks while mopping infinite floors. Camilla and her small team reviewed every application personally, reading stories that broke the heart and lit up hope simultaneously. There was so much wasted talent, so much ignored capacity, so much dignity stepped on by systems that valued paper over the person. They selected 40 candidates for the practical testing phase. On the day of the evaluations, Camilla arrived early at the center where they would be held. The candidates waited nervously in a large room, sitting in cheap folding chairs. They were of all ages, from 25 to 60 years old. Some wore worn but impeccably clean clothes. Others had hands marked by years of manual work. Everyone had eyes full of a fragile hope that was scary to feed too much, for fear it would break. Camilla stood in front of them and spoke from a deep and honest place. "I know you are nervous. I know some of you have been waiting years for a chance like this. I know the world has repeatedly told you that you are not enough, that you do not have the right credentials, that you should settle for less than you deserve." She paused, looking at them one by one. "But I am here to tell you something different. You are enough. Talent has no zip code or prestigious last name. Excellence does not need noble titles. The only thing you need is to prove what you know. And we are going to listen with attention." An older man in the second row, dressed in a blue janitor's uniform, timidly raised his hand. "Yes? Is it true that you also worked in cleaning?" His voice trembled. "Or is that just something the newspapers said to make the story prettier?" "It is completely true. For 5 years I cleaned offices, classrooms, public bathrooms, and I was never ashamed of that work, because honest work is not a reason for shame. What is shameful is a world that values diplomas more than people." The man nodded with tears in his eyes. Others in the room murmured among themselves, strengthened by those words. The evaluations lasted all day. A young Moroccan man named Omar, who worked delivering food by bicycle 12 hours a day, proved a surprising command of Arabic, French, Spanish, and English. His interpretation of a speech on the climate crisis was technically flawless and emotionally resonant. A Filipino woman named Teresa, a domestic worker for 15 years who sent half her salary to her 4 children in Manila, translated from Tagalog with a precision that impressed the whole panel. Her voice was soft but firm, and she captured cultural nuances that required lived knowledge, not just academic. A Colombian man named Andres, a night security guard in a corporate building, showed exceptional skills in Portuguese and Italian that he had learned talking with the international cleaning staff during his solitary 10-hour shifts. At the end of the exhausting day, Camilla and her team met to evaluate results. Out of 40 candidates evaluated, they selected 20 for the first official cohort of the program. They were not the 20 with the most flawless spelling or perfect pronunciation. They were the 20 with the most visible potential, the most palpable determination, the most demonstrable capacity for growth. Robert looked at the final list with evident satisfaction. "This is going to change many lives, Camilla." "It's already changing them," she replied, thinking of the hopeful faces she had seen that day. Not everything was unconditional support. Gustav Mendez, the head of human resources of 53 years with 30 in the institution, represented the old guard that saw the program as a direct threat to the established order. In a planning meeting 2 months after the start, he expressed his reservations without filters. "With all due respect, Miss Sir Andrade," his tone made it clear the respect was minimal. "The UN has very specific standards for its interpreters, university degrees, recognized international certifications, years of formally documented experience. We cannot just ignore decades of protocols because someone had a lucky moment in front of cameras." Camila felt her blood warm up, but kept a studied composure. "Mr. Mendez, it was not luck. It was rigorous preparation, unbreakable discipline, absolute dedication. And if those are not exactly the values that the UN says it looks for, then maybe I am misunderstanding the mission of this organization." Elena Cortez intervened with a firm voice. "Gustav, protocols exist to guarantee quality, not to arbitrarily exclude genuine talent. What Camilla proved and what these 20 candidates are proving in training goes way beyond any paper certificate. We urgently need to rethink how we define and identify true excellence. But opening doors to people without formal credentials could create a dangerous precedent," Gustav insisted, crossing his arms. "What comes next? Hiring anyone who claims to speak languages without any verification?" "Not just anyone," Camilla replied with forced patience. "Those who can prove it through rigorous tests demanding practical evaluations, supervised training periods. I am not asking for standards to be lowered. I am asking for the legitimate paths to reach them to be broadened." Mariana Vega, present at the meeting, added her experienced voice. "Gustav, when I started 3 decades ago, they also told me I didn't have the appropriate credentials, but someone decided to give me a chance based on demonstrated capacity. Here I am 30 years later, having served in crucial negotiations. Do you really want to be remembered as the person who closed the same door that others generously opened for us?" Gustav leaned back uncomfortable, with no solid arguments left. The meeting continued, and although there was more bureaucratic resistance in following weeks, the project was approved with an adequate budget and official institutional support. But the most unexpected ally came from where she least expected. Klein requested to meet with Camilla privately. They met at a neutral cafe near the main building. Klein arrived on time, but different, less arrogant, more human. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he said, sitting down carefully. "What did you want to talk about?" Klein took a deep breath. "I have been reflecting intensely on what happened, on how I treated you, on what that says about me. During my whole career, I have measured people only by external credentials, by social origin, by how they fit my preconceived expectations. And I missed seeing real human beings with intrinsic value. And why are you telling me this now?" "Because I want to help. I want to support your program financially if necessary, logistically, using my contacts in circles where you still don't have access, not to wash my guilt publicly, but because I genuinely believe it is the right and necessary thing." Camilla studied him in a long silence. She could see that the change was authentic, though incomplete. Klein still had much to learn about humility and empathy, but at least he was willing to try consciously. "All right," she said finally, "but on one important condition." "Which one?" "That you don't just give money from afar, that you come regularly to the training sessions, that you personally meet the participants, that you listen to their stories directly, that you unlearn prejudices working side by side with the people you systematically ignored before." Klein nodded without hesitation. "I completely accept." And he kept his word. In following weeks, Klein showed up at the program sessions, initially uncomfortable but gradually more genuine. The participants mistrusted him at first, understandably, but he persisted. He listened to Omar describe how he had fled Morocco. He listened to Teresa explain years of painful separation from her children. He listened to Andres tell how he studied Portuguese, listening to Brazilian music during solitary night watch shifts. Something changed in Klein. He did not become a perfect saint, but he became someone more conscious, more human, more willing to question his own privileges and prejudices. And when Voices Without Borders needed a powerful advocate in corporate circles where Camilla did not have natural access, Klein used his considerable influence to open doors, get funding, convince skeptics. It was not a complete Hollywood redemption, but it was real growth, and that, Camilla knew, was enough. The following months brought changes that no one had completely anticipated. Voices Without Borders was not only transforming individual lives, it was questioning entire institutional structures and generating uncomfortable conversations about meritocracy, access, and privilege. In a public hospital in New York, Dr. Sarah Soto read about the program during her lunch break. She immediately thought of Lucia, the woman who cleaned her office every night with almost obsessive meticulousness. Sarah had noticed for months that Lucia organized documents alphabetically, subtly corrected grammatical errors in notes on the board, classified files with a more efficient system than the official administrative staff. She looked for Lucia that afternoon. "Did you study something before working here?" Lucia, 50 years old, lowered her eyes ashamed. 2 years of medicine in Columbia, doctor. University of Antioquia. But we had to migrate due to violence when I was 23. Here my degrees don't work and I don't have money to revalidate. What if we created something similar to that UN program, but for migrant health staff? Lucia's eyes filled with instant tears. That conversation turned into a pilot project. Lucia was not the only one. There were qualified nurses working as janitors, paramedics cleaning bathrooms, pharmacists serving coffee. When Camilla found out, she contacted Sarah and they began to collaborate, sharing methodologies and amplifying mutual impact. Something similar happened in the education sector. Isabel Ramirez, a school principal in the Bronx, noticed that her maintenance staff collectively spoke more languages than the entire teaching body. She contacted Voices Without Borders, and they created a bilingual assistance program. People who worked at the school could train to help in language classes and serve as cultural bridges for newly arrived migrant students. Paula, one of Camilla's roommates, was one of the first to join. She had cleaned schools for 5 years, invisible to teachers and students. Now, in addition to her cleaning work, which she kept for financial stability, she spent 2 hours every morning helping Brazilian and Portuguese children adapt to the American system, translating important communications, teaching English with maternal patience. "I never thought I could do something like this," she told Camilla one night while they had dinner. "That I could wake up feeling that I truly matter." "You always mattered," Camilla replied. "It's just that now others see it too." Jessica, the other roommate, found her path unexpectedly. She had learned self-taught graphic design for years, creating flyers for Brazilian businesses that could not pay agencies. With support from the mentoring program associated with Voices Without Borders, she refined her skills and got a job at an agency that valued her unique multicultural perspective. The three still lived together in the small apartment in Queens, not out of necessity now, but by choice. That space represented their roots, their shared struggle, the reminder of where they came from. Meanwhile, the first 20 graduates began real assignments. Omar translated refugee testimonies with cultural precision that saved asylum cases. Teresa worked with abused domestic workers, capturing nuances that other interpreters lost. Andres discovered errors in million-dollar contracts thanks to his practical technical knowledge. Every success generated more institutional trust, more opportunities, more evidence that the model worked through real competence, not charity. Even Gustav Mendes had to publicly recognize, "I was wrong." The results are undeniable. These interpreters not only meet standards, they frequently exceed them because they bring lived experience that no university can teach. Elena took advantage of that moment to propose international expansion to Geneva, Brussels, Paris, Rome. The proposal was approved, and Camilla found herself coordinating with directors of multiple cities, working 18 hours a day, making sure that each new location maintained the integrity of the original program. There were nights of exhaustion where she considered quitting. But then she received messages from Omar about his latest successful assignment, or videos of Andres teaching English for free to Ukrainian refugees, or calls from Teresa describing how she had helped another woman escape abuse, and she remembered why it all mattered. 6 months after the launch, Voices Without Borders had trained 80 people in 4 American cities with concrete plans for expansion to 10 more countries. But more important than the numbers was the cultural change that was being generated. The stories began to appear in national and international media, not as exotic curiosities, but as serious questions about access systems and definitions of merit. Universities began to reconsider their admission criteria. Companies implemented similar programs to identify ignored internal talent. One rainy November afternoon, Camilla received an unexpected call that made her heart stop briefly. "Ms. Andrade, this is Ambassador Ahmed speaking. I have something important to show you. Can you come tomorrow to the Syrian consulate?" Intrigued and nervous, she accepted. The Syrian consulate was a discreet building in Manhattan. When Camilla arrived, the ambassador received her personally with a smile that lit up his normally serious face. "Thank you for coming. There is someone who wants to meet you." He led her through a hallway decorated with photographs of Damascus before the war. They arrived at a small room where, sitting next to an older woman with grey hair, a girl of about 8 years old, waited with a light blue dress and neat braids. "Camilla," the ambassador said with an emotional voice, "this is Layla." Camilla's heart stopped. Layla, the girl from the speech, the girl who drew houses in the sand, the girl who had stopped talking. But I thought she was in Greece. She was, until 3 weeks ago. The ambassador knelt next to Layla. Thanks to the attention that speech generated, several organizations mobilized. Layla received psychological treatment, was reunited with her grandmother Amina, and now they have been approved for resettlement in the United States. The older woman spoke with a soft voice. "I am Amina. We got lost in the evacuation of Aleppo. I spent 2 years looking for her. It was thanks to the stir of that speech that we finally found each other." Layla looked at Camilla and, surprisingly, spoke with a small but clear voice. "Are you the lady who translated Uncle Ahmed's words, the one who made people listen to my story?" Camilla knelt with tears running down her face. "Yes, little one." "I was." Layla pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "I drew this for you. It was a crayon drawing. A house with flowers, blue sky, bright sun, and 2 figures holding hands. Who are they?" "That's you." She pointed to the large figure. "And this is me. Because you helped me find my new home." Camilla hugged the girl, feeling that everything made sense. It was not about recognition, but about this. Girls who spoke again, families who found each other again, hope that was reborn. They spent an hour together. Layla showed her her English notebooks, talked to her about her foster family and her cat Misho. The ambassador explained that the drawings were part of her healing therapy. At first she only drew empty structures. Now they have life, color, future. When they said goodbye, Layla asked, "Will you come back to visit me?" "I promise. And you will keep drawing for me. And will you teach me more words in Arabic? I want to remember my mum's songs." "I will teach you everything you want, little one." Camilla left the consulate with the drawing protected. She walked through New York without a destination, processing the intensity of that encounter. She passed by places that marked her path: the university where she cleaned classrooms, the library where she studied in secret, the park where she practiced languages. Her steps led her to the UN building. She went up to the third floor and entered the booth where it had all begun. She sat down and looked at the empty hall. Her phone vibrated with messages from Omar, Teresa, and Andres, telling her about their recent successes. She took out Layla's drawing and looked at it for a long time. She thought of her mother and father in Brazil, of her friends, of the graduates of the program, of Klein who had learned humility. In the hallway, on her way out, she crossed paths with a young woman in a cleaning uniform with headphones, murmuring in a low voice, "Are you Miss Andrade?" "Yes." "I also study languages at night, like you did. Do you think that one day—" Camila recognized that look immediately. "What is your name?" "Alina. From Romania." "How many languages do you speak?" "Romanian, Spanish, French, basic Italian." Camila took out a card. "Apply to the program. Mention my name. I will be waiting for you." Alina took the card like a treasure and hugged Camila tight. "Thank you. Thank you." Camila knew with certainty that Alina would apply, would be accepted, and her story would be the next one to change lives. The cycle continued. That night, Camila returned to her apartment in Queens. Paula and Jessica had prepared feijoada, and the familiar aroma filled the space. They had dinner together, laughing, sharing stories of the day. "You know what's the most incredible thing?" Paula said. "That you did everything without stopping being who you are. You are still one of us. I always will be. That's what made me strong." In her room, Camila hung Layla's drawing next to the photo of her parents and her official certificate. The three objects told her complete story, where she came from, who she was now, and why it all mattered. Her phone vibrated. It was her mother. "We are proud not only of what you achieved, but of how you did it. With dignity, without stepping on anyone to go up." Camila replied, "Everything I am comes from you." She closed her eyes and whispered in the dark, "Every voice deserves to be heard. Every person deserves to be seen. And as long as I have breath, I will keep opening doors." In different corners of New York, Alina marked the date of the call on her calendar. Layla drew her new family before sleeping, and in the forgotten booth of the UN building, the space was full of promise. 3 months after the meeting with Layla, Camila received an invitation that took her completely by surprise, to give the opening talk at the annual UN Human Rights Conference in Geneva. The event would bring together more than 500 delegates from 80 countries, prestigious academics, recognized activists, representatives of governments, and international organizations. The night before traveling, sitting at the small table of her apartment in Queens, she tried to write notes for her speech, but every formal sentence she drafted sounded empty. Paula, preparing tea in the kitchen, noticed her frustration. "What's wrong?" "I don't know what to tell them. They are important people with doctorates. What can I teach them?" Paula sat across from her with 2 steaming cups. "Tell them your truth. Nothing more. Your truth is more powerful than any perfect academic speech." The Palace of Nations in Geneva was imposing, with its flags waving and marble hallways that smelled of history. They led her to a huge hall with very high ceilings and crystal chandeliers that were worth more than everything she would earn in her life. When her turn came, she went up to the stage with her heart hammering. She looked at the 500 expectant faces, some with genuine interest, others with barely hidden skepticism. She set her notes aside and spoke from the heart. "For years, I was completely invisible. I cleaned the offices where many of you work. I emptied your wastebaskets full of important drafts. I mopped while you slept. And during all that time, I studied, I learned, I grew. But no one really saw me because they decided who I was based solely on my uniform." The silence in the hall was absolute. 500 pairs of eyes looked at her with sudden attention. They humiliated me publicly. They told me, "Where did you study?" On YouTube. They laughed when I suggested I could help. I had 2 options: accept the definition others imposed on me, or prove who I really was. I chose the second. Not out of empty pride, but because I knew that if I gave up, I was telling millions of other invisible people that they were not worth it either. She walked slowly across the stage, without notes, without rehearsal, only with truth. This program is not about me. It is not an inspiring story so you can feel good for 15 minutes. It is about recognizing something uncomfortable, that there are millions of brilliant, capable, extraordinary people that the world systematically ignores because they were born in the wrong zip codes, because their parents could not pay for expensive universities, because their hands have calluses from honest work. She paused, letting the words settle. We are not asking for charity. We are not asking for pity. We are demanding justice, the real opportunity to prove what we carry inside. Because talent has no prestigious last name. Excellence does not need noble titles. Competence is not measured by the name of your university, but by what you can do when someone finally gives you a real opportunity. A woman in the 3rd row discreetly wiped her eyes. An older man in the 5th row nodded slowly. Omar, one of our graduates, delivered food by bicycle before we accepted him. Now he translates testimonies that save lives. Teresa cleaned houses while sending money to 4 children in the Philippines. Now she helps abused women find their voice. Andres watched buildings at night. Now he prevents million-dollar errors because his practical experience allows him to see what translators with doctorates miss. She stopped in the center of the stage. Do you know what they have in common? That talent always existed. It was always there. But the system decided not to see it because our definitions of merit are designed to exclude exactly the people who most need opportunities. The ovation began before she finished. It was not polite or brief. It was long, sustained, with people gradually standing up until the whole hall was applauding. Some moved to tears, others visibly uncomfortable because their privileges had been named directly. Afterwards, dozens approached. Some wanted to tell their stories of overcome invisibility. Others asked how to replicate the model. Others offered funding, support, connections. Klein, who had traveled specifically to be present, waited until the crowd dispersed. You have changed much more than my perspective, Camilla. You have changed my whole life. Thank you for not giving up on me when it would have been easier to hate me. People can grow if we give them space to do it, Alvin. That night, back in New York, Camilla visited Layla as she had promised. The girl opened the door with enthusiasm and dragged her toward her room to show her something special. Look! She pointed to the wall where she had pasted dozens of new drawings. Camilla observed them with attention. The evolution was notable. The first simple houses, the most recent ones elaborate, full of life and color. The newest drawing, the largest one, showed a huge house with many bright windows and dozens of smiling figures around, some big, some small, all holding hands. Who are they all? Layla pointed to each figure with pride. This is Amina, my grandmother. These are Carlos and Mercedes. This is you. This is Uncle Ahmed. These are my friends Sophia and Chen. This is Misho the cat. Her voice was clear, sure, full of life. There was no trace left of the silent girl from the camp. I am not alone anymore, right? Camilla knelt down to her height, took her small hands. You were never really alone, little one. You just needed to find your people. And now you found them. Layla hugged her tight. When I grow up, I want to do what you do, help people that others don't see. Then you will do it, Layla, and I will be here to help you. Mercedes appeared at the door. Are you staying for dinner? Carlos is making his special paella. They had dinner together at a table that felt like home. Amina telling stories of Syria, Carlos explaining the secrets of the paella, Mercedes asking about the program, Layla interrupting with observations that made everyone laugh. This, thought Camilla, this is what we are building, not just opportunities, but real community. When she said goodbye near midnight, Layla handed her the large drawing. It's for you. So you remember that now you also have a big family. Camilla walked toward the subway with the drawing rolled up under her arm. New York shone with nightlights reflected on wet sidewalks. At a bus stop, a young man studied English grammar under a weak light. She stopped. Studying English? The young man nodded timidly. Yes, ma'am. I work cleaning, but I want to improve. Camilla handed him a card. Take it. It's information about a program that might interest you. Really? Do you think someone like me? I know someone like you can, because I was someone like you. She arrived at her apartment near one, Paula and Jessica were waiting for her with hot tea. She told them everything while hanging Layla's drawing on the wall next to other precious memories. "You could have moved to a luxury apartment months ago," Jessica said, "but you are still here with us. Because here is where I belong. This place keeps me connected to why I do what I do. If I moved away, I might forget what it feels like to be invisible." Later, alone in her room, Camilla checked emails. There was one from Alina, the Romanian woman from the hallway. Subject: "Accepted. Thank you for believing in me." She opened it smiling. Alina wrote with emotion about her acceptance in the third cohort, about how she could not believe her life was changing. Camilla replied, "Do not thank me yet. Thank me when you graduate, when you get your first assignment, when you help another invisible person. Then we will have closed the circle." She lay back looking at the cracked ceiling she knew by heart. She thought of the path traveled, from cleaning classrooms to speaking in Geneva, from public humiliation to international recognition, from invisibility to this. But the most important thing was not her transformation. It was that she had opened a path that others now followed. Omar, Teresa, Andres, Alina, and hundreds more were building their own stories, and every story would open doors for others. Before sleeping, she wrote in her journal her father's words, "Dignity is not in what you do, but in how you do it, and true success is measured by how many hands you extend to help others rise with you." She turned off the light. Outside, New York slept. But somewhere someone was studying in secret. Someone was memorizing vocabulary while cleaning. Someone was dreaming of being more. And now they had something that did not exist before. An open door, a real opportunity, a voice that would be heard. In the forgotten booth where it all began, the space was full of history, purpose, and promise. She had proven something essential, that greatness does not always come with titles. Sometimes it comes in silence from the margins, and when it is seen, it transforms everything. One voice at a time, one life at a time, one open door at a time. Competence is not measured by the position we hold, but by what we carry inside. And true greatness is in lighting the light so that others also shine.